Printmaking is the artistic process of making and transferring an image onto another surface. And today, more specifically, we're going to learn about relief printmaking, which is where some sort of surface, some sort of plate, is carved into to reveal a raised image. That image is then inked and printed. Now the plate, what you're going to be carving into, could be a wood block. It could be a material called linoleum, which makes a lino cut, which we're going to work with later. But today we're going to carve into an eraser to make a stamp. So the process of relief printmaking can be simplified into 4 steps. First, you need to decide what it is that you're actually going to carve. Then you're going to carve it using a series of tools, which we'll go over momentarily. Then you're going to roll your ink out onto your plate, and then you're going to print it onto paper. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about some of the printmaking tools that you're going to be using. The first is a gouge or a knife, and this is what you're going to use to actually carve into your plate. Each of them has a different shaped tip, and that tip just corresponds to the shape it is, and therefore how much the shape and size that it is, and therefore how much of the material it's actually going to carve out. We have a 1V that is really good for more detail areas, and you have a 2V that's a little bit larger, a 3U, a little bit larger. We have a 4 square, it's more angular, a 5U, also larger, and then our biggest one that's good for just taking out huge chunks is 6 knife. Next, we have the actual plate. Now, I talked about how in relief printmaking, you can either have some sort of wood block as your plate, you can have a linoleum block as your plate, but we're going to be using a magic rub eraser as our plate for our stamp. The next is a brayer, and a brayer is what you're going to use to actually roll out your ink. The brayer ensures that you get a nice even coating, which is super important to get a print that's even. Then we have the actual ink itself. So you could do printmaking with acrylic paint if you wanted to. However, printing ink is specially formulated so it doesn't dry as quickly, and the overall finish is a lot nicer. It is water soluble. It's also more expensive. So we really just want to use a little bit. A little bit goes a long way, and it is possible to over ink your plate. So it's actually better to err on the side of less ink. Lastly, we have a baren. We're not going to be using this too much for our stamps, but we will be using it later in our larger project when we come back from break. And the baren is just what you put on top of the plate to when you're pressing down to make the print so that you're applying even pressure so that it transfers onto the paper evenly. It's incredibly important that when you are carving, you are always carving away from yourself and holding the block down. I'm going to give each one of you a little mat that should help your eraser from sticking, and you want to put that down, put your eraser on top, hold both of those pieces down, and make sure that you are carving away from yourself. This is not one of those, the teacher is being paranoid. It is a very real risk that you may cut yourself. And since these tools are super sharp that they're meant to cut through wood, you will, or you can, hurt your finger or your hand pretty badly if you cut into yourself. So please, please, please always remember to carve away from yourself and hold the block down. Please, 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 please do not leave any tools unattended or out of place. So I have different cups that have tape on them that label where each gouge is supposed to go. After you have used a particular tool, please put it with the sharp side down in the cup so that we don't lose them, and worse, that somebody doesn't pick one up or accidentally sit on it or put their hand into it and cut themselves. So your mini project. Your mini project is to create a stamp that can be used to make a repeating design print. Pretty much you're making a stamp. Now the goal for this little mini project, since we only have 2 or 3 days, is really just to get you familiar with relief carving. So I'm not grading you on concept or anything deep like that. I really just want you to understand how to make a print, how to translate your drawing into a design that's print ready, and how to carve safely and ink properly. So let's look at these two images of stamps. These are both stamps that I carved of a mushroom. Now, as you're looking at them, this is the print, this is the stamp. What can you tell that's different? You can probably see that here the mushroom is being created by the black, and here the mushroom is really sort of being defined by the white lines. Now, this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the year about positive and negative space. I think this is the trickiest thing about printmaking, is that you have to think in this way that divides space into positive and negative space, where you don't have to do it, or it's not as critical when you do it in drawing and painting. So the first thing you need to decide in your stamp is what is the positive space and what is the negative space. Do you want your subject to be what is carved, so what is white, the lack of, or do you want your subject to be what is inked? The second thing, and we're not going to harp on this for too much, but just remembering that you can show depth through line weight and texture. So line weight just means when you have a thinner line versus a thicker line. When you have a thicker line, it shows depth. When you have a thinner line, not so much, right? So manipulating that to create depth and texture if you'd like in your design. So step one, you're going to pick some sort of subject, anything you like. You can go for a Christmas theme because we're going to be going on break, but it can be anything. It could be some sort of character, it could be an object, it could be a little scene, it could be some sort of pattern, some sort of geometric pattern, or it could be a word. I would say whatever it is that you choose, just make the most of the space. So don't try to do something overly detailed in this small space, but at the same time, don't just leave all of this space unoccupied and do a small dot in the middle of your stamp either. So how can you best use the space? Something that's really important about printmaking is that everything that you're going to do will be backwards. So for example, here where they printed the word joy, that means that you need to carve the word joy backwards. I have seen it happen so many times where someone carves their word right side, sort of the way you read it, and then when they go to print their stamp, it prints out backwards. So if you're going to use text, use this alphabet as a guide in this slide to help you figure out what the letter should look like. Then, using this worksheet in your sketchbook, think about what it's actually going to look like. So let's just say I started with a smiley face. At this point, I could choose to just make my lines thicker, and that could be it. So this means that everything that is white, I would carve away, and what is black will be inked. Over here, it's the opposite. So this means that I would just carve the white, and everything that is black would be inked and printed. Over here, part of the smiley face is going to be cut out, but I'm going to ink the back. Here, I'm going to cut out all of the negative space around the smiley face, but I want to just keep his face inked in black, but carve out his features. And here I'm sort of doing a half and half thing. Whatever you decide to do, remember that what is black will be inked and whatever is white will be carved out. Once again, what is black will be inked and what is white will be carved out. So use these spaces below and a 2B or 4B pencil to sort of try out a couple of different ideas. Going back to this mushroom, what is this going to look like, right? You have lots of different options. So go ahead and try a few different options and a couple of different designs before you get carving onto your stamp. You're going to take one of these designs and you're going to draw it directly onto your stamp with the black as the graphite and the white is just going to be the color of the eraser. This way you're giving yourself some sort of guide of where to carve. Don't just carve free going into it. Make sure you have your image sketched out and have the parts that are going to be black shaded in with the pencil. Next actually comes carving. So again, make sure that you're really choosing the right tool for the amount that you need to remove. And the most important thing with printmaking is that you can't take something back. So if you carve something that you weren't supposed to carve, there's no way for you to put it back. So really be careful and thoughtful about what you're carving, and is that something that you need to carve? And again, safety first.